So I love the classic farm boy, chosen one trope, and I also love like dragons and sort of the classic fantasy stuff. But sometimes you just want something a little different. So I've compiled a list of fantasy books with unique or interesting stuff. Book numero uno is The Furies of Calderon. This book has a really interesting story of how it came about. So Jim Butcher was on Reddit and early forums for writing. This was before he was the Jim Butcher that he is today. And they had a bit of an argument on if you can take any ideas and mash them together and make them work. Jim Butcher said he could, and the other writer said, no, you can't take absolutely anything. And Jim Butcher said, right, okay, fine, give me 2 ideas and I will mash them together into a fantasy series. And the 2 ideas were Pokemon and the Roman Empire. And now it's a 6-book series. And that's what this is. Pokemon and the Roman Empire. I don't think I even need to tell you any more than that. I mean, come on. That's such a cool premise. For 1,000 years, the people of Alera have been united by their unique bond with their Furies. Elementals of earth, air, fire, water, and metal. But their world is changing. So if you want to read Pokemon meets the Roman Empire, that's a book for you. And while we're talking about Pokemon, there is also a book called On Lavender Tides, which is a self-published fantasy by Travis Riddle, which is also inspired by Pokemon. Ever since he was a kid, all Boltvana wanted was to become a world-renowned Jeku summoner, like his grandmother, battling other summoners in front of audiences of thousands. But from where he stands now, living up to the Vanna name feels impossible. When his best friend, Alani, an initiate of the local church, is sent on a pilgrimage to find her path in life and the god she will follow, Bolt sees the perfect opportunity to launch his career by escorting her across the archipelago and its purple seas. The islands are filled with monsters to imprint and summoners to battle, with every victory bringing him one step closer to his dream. It will take more than just his family name to reach the same heights as his grandmother, but Bolt won't stop until he does. Next up we have Black Stoneheart. I actually put out a poll on Instagram asking for creative and unique fantasy books, and this one came up quite a lot. And rightly so. A broken man, Karain, awakens, alone and lost. His stone heart has been shattered, littered across the world. With each piece he regains some small shard of the man he once was. He follows the trail, fragment by fragment, remembering his terrible past. There was a woman. There was a sword. There was an end to sorrow. This is the first book in the trilogy and it has one of the coolest covers. Next up we have The Justice of Kings, which is a fairly recent book and the sequel just came out this week actually. The Tyranny of Faith. This is about a justice who is judge, jury, and executioner. The thing that is really interesting about this book is the fact that it is actually from the perspective of his partner. When the pair investigates the murder of a provincial aristocrat, they unearth a conspiracy which stretches to the very top of imperial society. As the stakes rise and become ever more personal, Von Volt and Helena must make a choice. Will they abandon the laws that they've sworn to uphold in order to protect the Empire? Next up we have Jade City, which is the first book in the Greenbone saga. This is a gangster Godfather-esque story between 2 competing clans. Their small little island, Janlun, is the only place in the entire world that they can find natural resource of jade. And jade gives certain abilities and strengths if trained properly in the disciplines that they can use to fight off bad people. They're pretty slow books and they're very character focused. There isn't a lot of action scenes, particularly when you continue in the series. I'm currently reading Jade War, I've just about finished it, and it's even more political and slow paced. However, the characters are great and the payoff to some of the setups in this series is fantastic. And there's some really shocking moments in both book 1 and book 2, things that I did not see coming at all. Next up we have the Helm of Midnight. In a daring and deadly heist, thieves have made away with an artifact of terrible power, the death mask of Louis Charbon. Made by a master craftsman, it is imbued with the spirit of a monster from history, a serial murderer who terrorized the city. Now Charbon is loose once more, killing from beyond the grave. But these murders are different from before, not simply random, but the work of a deliberate mind probing for answers to a sinister question. Krona, her Vath, and her fellow regulators must enter the mind of madness to stop the insatiable killer, while facing the terrible truths left in his wake. Evil, spirit, living in a mask, killing lots of people, truths to uncover. Very unique, very creative, and sounds like a great read. Next up we have Legends and Lattes. I would be amiss to not include this in the list because it blew up from its creative premise of having an orc being done with adventuring and wanting to settle down and make a coffee shop. A novel of high fantasy and low stakes. After decades of adventuring, Viv the Orc Barbarian is finally hanging up her sword for good. Now she sets her sights on a new dream, for she plans to open the first coffee shop in the city of Thun, even though no one there knows what coffee actually is. I don't think I really need to sell this one. It blew up last year. It is a cozy, low stakes, fun, heartwarming read. And Travis Baldry is a super talented audio narrator, so I would also recommend picking it up on audiobook. However, the cover's really cool too, so I get it if you want to pick up a physical copy. Now, a book I don't think I've ever mentioned on this channel, Flames of Mira. It's good. The main character is fleshbound to his master, and this creates some conflict between the cast of characters. Society lives in tunnels underground, clinging close to lava to avoid their uninhabitable icy surface. It has a chemical-based magic system akin to your Mistborn, and there's other super creative things within the lore that I don't want to spoil, so I'm just going to say, read it, because it's good. Talking about Mistborn, I don't really need to include him, but DeSando, pretty much all his books are super creative and unique. I love how he doesn't really fall into standard settings or magic systems. He's really creative in the way he builds his world and his characters. I've just picked Warbreaker because the color magic system, and that's really cool, but I also would say that Thetress, which came out this year, is also a fantastic read with super creative, unique ideas, having a sea made of spores that react when they touch water, and they fall from the moon. I don't own Thetress, that's also why I put Warbreaker there. Next up we have Prince of Thorns. Now this is a fantasy book that's from the perspective of a sociopath. From being a privileged royal child, Jorg Ankrath has become the Prince of Thorns, a charming, immortal boy leading a band of outlaws in a series of raids and atrocities. In a violent, chaotic world, Jorg has the ability to master the living and the dead. But there is still one thing that puts a chill in him. Returning to his father's castle, Jorg must confront the horrors from his childhood and carve himself a future with all hands turned against it. This is a super dark, grimdark fantasy book from the perspective of a pretty complicated, some could say unlikable main character. So if that sounds like something that you want to try out, it's Thorns. Next up we have A Master of Jinn. In a 1912 steampunk fantasy Cairo, we follow Detective Fatima as she tries to uncover the secret behind a man called Al-Jahiz. This takes place in a world not too different from our own, but about 50 years before the start of this book, there was an event where Al-Jahiz opened a door to another realm, letting in jinn and angels and lots of creatures from this other realm. And then he went missing. At the start of this book, a Brotherhood dedicated to Al-Jahiz are murdered, and the murderer claims to be Al-Jahiz returned. So this follows Fatima trying to uncover why, if it's actually him that's back, and why he killed his own Brotherhood. And I highly recommend it. And last but not least, we have a book that I've only just found out about today, and I love it so much. Endling the Last. It looks like a Labrador and a mouse on a fantasy adventure. How cool is that? I don't know anything about it. I don't think I need to know anything about it. I want to read it. I have been informed that that isn't a dog and a mouse, and it's creatures that are within this fantasy world, but looks like a golden Labrador and a mouse on a fantasy adventure. And I want to read it. And there you have it. 13 creative and unique fantasy books if you're done questing for Dark Lords and magical jewelry. Although I guess the Helm one's kind of jewelry because it's a mask, but not got a serial killer in it. But let me know in the comments below some creative and unique fantasy books that you've either read or heard of that sound really good, and which of these would you like to pick up. Thank you for watching, and outro!